My father died on a Tuesday morning. I was at the hospital. I had been there for 3 days straight, sleeping in a chair, eating vending machine food, watching the monitors. I had called my mother when it first happened, because even after everything, she was still his ex-wife and I thought she deserved to know. She said she was busy. She did not come. But 11 days later, 4 days after the funeral, she was standing at my front door in a blazer, with a lawyer beside her and a folder of documents in her hand, asking me, no, telling me, to sign over control of my father's estate. I am 24 years old. I had just buried the only parent who ever actually showed up for me. And my mother thought this was her opportunity. Today I'm going to tell you everything. The divorce. The custody I never wanted. The day I finally got to choose. The 8 years my father and I built together. And the moment I looked my mother's lawyer dead in the eyes and said the words I had been preparing my entire life to say. I'm Ethan. And this is my story. My parents divorced when I was 9. I remember it the way you remember things at that age, not as a clean sequence of events but as a series of feelings that don't fully have words yet. The shouting. The silences that came after the shouting. The morning my dad sat on the edge of my bed and told me, very quietly and very carefully, that he and my mom weren't going to live together anymore, but that nothing about how much they both loved me was going to change. He kept that promise. She did not. I want to be careful here because I'm an adult now and I understand that divorce is complicated and people are complicated and nobody is purely a villain in their own story. I genuinely try to extend that grace. But I also think there is a version of telling my story honestly that requires me to say plainly, my mother is a difficult person in specific, consistent ways that made growing up in her house genuinely hard. She was, and still is, the kind of woman who treats kindness as a currency. She gives it when she needs something and withdraws it when she doesn't. She performs warmth for an audience. She has a particular gift for making you feel, in a public setting, like the most important person in the room, and then, in private, making you understand that her comfort comes before yours, always, without exception. She is not someone who asks how you are unless she's already decided how she wants you to answer. The people who knew her casually thought she was wonderful. Charming, even. She had the smile for it. She had the vocabulary, the sweethearts and the of courses, and the concerned face head tilt. The people who lived with her knew the other version. The court, when it ordered custody arrangements after the divorce, knew the public version. They saw a presentable, articulate mother who expressed deep concern for her son's well-being and a clear commitment to providing stability. My father, who is, among many things, a man who does not perform, came across as quieter, less expressive, easier to underestimate in a courtroom setting. I was awarded to my mother's primary custody with visitation rights to my father every other weekend and alternating holidays. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud to my mother. I cried in the back seat of her car on the way home from that hearing. Not because I was sad to see my dad. But because I already knew, at 9 years old, what the next several years of my life were going to feel like. I was right. I won't catalog every moment of those years because this would become a book and also because I don't want to spend more words on that period of my life than it deserves. What I'll say is this. My mother's house was a performance. Everything was about image, how we looked to neighbors, to her friends, to her rotating cast of men she dated after the divorce. There were rules, but the rules existed for her comfort, not for any coherent value system. There was praise, but it was conditional, calibrated, withheld strategically. There was love, or something that wore love's clothing, but it came with receipts and expiration dates. My father's house, on every other weekend, was different. My dad was a construction project manager. He worked hard, he was straightforward, he made excellent scrambled eggs on Saturday mornings and watched old movies with me on Friday nights and never once made me feel like a burden or a prop or a performance. He asked me questions and waited for the actual answers. He showed up to my school things. He remembered what I told him. With my mom I always felt like a supporting character in her story. With my dad I felt like a person. I spent those elementary and middle school years marking time. Counting down. There was a thing I held on to, something my dad had told me when the custody ruling came out, when I was 9 years old and trying not to cry. He said, when you're old enough, buddy, you get to decide. That day is going to come. That day was the first day of high school. In our state, At 14, a child can formally express a preference in custody arrangements that the court takes seriously, not as binding, but as significant. I had known about this provision since the year after the divorce because I had asked my dad's lawyer about it at some point when I was about 11 and had been quietly tracking it ever since. The week before high school started, I asked my dad if his offer was still open. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said yes. Of course it was. I told my mother I was moving to my father's house. I won't describe that conversation in detail because it was not good and it went on for a long time and some of it involved crying, hers, and some of it involved language that I don't think a 14-year-old should hear from a parent. What I'll say is that her primary objection was not about my well-being. It was about how it would look. It was about what people would think when they found out her son had chosen to leave. It was about her. The court formalized the new arrangement within 2 months. I moved my things into my dad's house on a Saturday in September and I slept better that night than I had in years. The next 8 years were the best of my life. I say that knowing how it sounds. I know I'm describing a time that started with a family broken apart and included a mother I effectively stopped having a real relationship with. I know that isn't a straightforward kind of good. But the life my father and I built in that house, the actual texture of our daily existence, was genuinely, deeply good and I refuse to qualify that more than I need to. My dad was present in the way that the best parents are present, not hovering, not performing, just there. There when I needed to talk and comfortable with quiet when I didn't. He came to my graduation. He helped me move into my first apartment. He gave me advice about work that was rooted in real experience and delivered without ego. He was the person I called when something went wrong and the person I wanted to tell first when something went right. He was, without qualification, my person. My mother, during this period, existed on the periphery of my life in the way that estranged family members do. Birthday texts. Occasional calls that felt like check-ins designed to maintain plausible deniability about the state of our relationship rather than actual connection. I answered them politely and briefly. I did not share anything real with her. She had spent too many years teaching me that real things in her hands became leverage. I turned 24 in March. My dad came to the dinner I had with friends. He was healthy. He was happy. He had been talking about retiring in a couple of years, maybe doing some traveling. We had discussed a trip together, somewhere out west, national parks, the kind of thing you keep saying you'll do someday. 6 weeks later, he had an accident on a job site. I'm going to be straightforward about this part because I don't want to draw it out more than I have to. My father was doing a walkthrough of an active construction project when a structural component failed unexpectedly. He suffered significant injuries, head trauma, internal bleeding. He was transported immediately and was in surgery within the hour. I got the call at work. I was at the hospital within 45 minutes. He was in the ICU. He was stable but critical. The doctors were careful with their words in the specific way that means they are managing your expectations without taking away your hope. I stayed. I did not leave except to change clothes once and shower at a friend's place who lived nearby. I ate what the vending machines offered. I slept in a chair that was shaped more like a challenge than a piece of furniture. I talked to the nurses. I learned the shift schedules. I sat with my dad through every visiting window they allowed. On the second day, I called my mother. I want to be honest about why I did this. It was not because I expected anything from her. It was not because I believed she would come. It was because my father, despite everything, was the father of her child, and I thought that deserved a phone call. I thought that was the decent thing to do and I wanted to do the decent thing regardless of whether she deserved it. I told her what happened. I told her which hospital. I told her it was serious. She said, "Oh my goodness, that's awful." She asked if I needed anything. I said I was okay, that I just wanted her to know. She said she had a lot going on that week but she would see what she could do. She did not come. She did not call to ask for updates. She sent one text on the second day that said, "Thinking of you both," which I read and did not respond to. My father died on the morning of the third day. I was in the room. I held his hand. I told him everything I wanted him to know and I believe, in whatever way matters, that some part of him heard it. I called the people who needed to be called. I arranged the things that needed to be arranged. I went through the following days on the particular autopilot that grief provides when there is still too much to do to stop and fall apart. The funeral was on a Friday. About 60 people came, co-workers, old friends, neighbors, people whose lives my father had been part of in the quiet consistent way that good people mark the world. I spoke. It took me 3 drafts to get through the speech without stopping, and the 4th draft I just spoke from without reading it, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember it felt true. My mother did not come to the funeral. She sent flowers. The card said, "With deepest sympathy." There was no personal note. My father's estate was straightforward. He had a will, prepared several years ago with a proper attorney, that left everything to me. The house. The savings. A modest investment account he had been building for 15 years. A life insurance policy through his employer. It was not a vast fortune. It was the accumulated result of a man who worked hard and spent carefully and thought about his son's future consistently for decades. It was real and it was meaningful and it was mine, and it was also, in the days right after his death, the furthest thing from my mind. 3 days after the funeral, 11 days after my father died, my phone rang. It was my mother. She was warm. Warmer than she had been in years. She asked how I was doing, really doing. She said she was so sorry she hadn't been able to make it to the hospital or the funeral, things had been so complicated, she hoped I understood. She said she had been thinking about me constantly. She said she was worried about me being alone through all of this. She said I could always call her. It was a very good performance. I'll give her that. I said I was managing. I said thank you for calling. I kept my answers short and gave her nothing real to hold. She called again 2 days later. This call started similarly, warm, concerned, maternal, but shifted. She mentioned that she had heard the estate was fairly substantial. She said she was sure it was overwhelming to think about managing that kind of thing on top of grieving. She said she had some experience with financial matters and would be happy to help oversee things until I was in a better headspace. I told her I appreciated the offer and that I had it handled. She pushed a little. Said she only meant it as support. Said it was a lot for someone my age to navigate alone. I told her I was 24 years old, that I had an attorney, and that everything was being handled appropriately. I got off the phone. I sat with what had just happened for a long time. I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind since the first warm call, that this was where it was going. I had known the pattern since I was old enough to recognize it. Warmth first. Concern second. Ask third. What I had not anticipated was how fast the third stage would arrive. For days after that second call, I heard a knock at my front door. I opened it to find my mother standing on my porch in a blazer I had never seen before, the kind of blazer people wear when they want to be taken seriously, and beside her, a man in a suit holding a leather folder. She introduced him as her attorney. I looked at her. I looked at him. I looked back at her. "What is this?" I said. She said she wanted to make sure I was protected. She said the documents were simple, just a power of attorney arrangement that would allow her to assist in managing the estate while I was in a difficult emotional period. She said it was for my benefit. She said it was temporary. She said she just wanted to help. I am going to tell you something that is going to sound strange. I was not angry in that moment. I had moved past anger somewhere during the 4 days between the phone call and the knock on the door. What I felt instead was something colder and cleaner than anger. Something that had been building since I was 9 years old in the back seat of her car. Something that finally, after 24 years, had arrived at the moment it had been pointing toward. I looked at her attorney. I said, "Are you here to pressure a recently bereaved 24-year-old into signing over legal control of his deceased father's estate to an ex-wife who was not present at the hospital, did not attend the funeral, and has no legal standing relative to this estate whatsoever?" The attorney looked at his folder. Then he looked at my mother. Then he looked at me. I said, "Because if so, I want you to be aware that I have my own attorney, that I've already discussed this estate in full, and that anything involving a power of attorney in my name requires my fully informed and uncoerced consent, which I am telling you right now, clearly, on my own doorstep, I am not giving." My mother started to speak. I turned to her. "You didn't come to the hospital," I said. "You didn't come to the funeral. You sent a card that said, 'With deepest sympathy,' like you were a distant colleague. And now you're on my porch 11 days later with a lawyer and a blazer. She said she was only trying to help. I said, I know what you're trying to do. I've known what you do since I was old enough to understand it. And I want you to hear me say this clearly so there is no confusion. There is nothing in my father's estate that belongs to you, there is nothing in my life that belongs to you, and this is the last time I am going to have this conversation. I looked at the attorney one more time. I said, please advise your client that any further attempts to approach me about this matter should go through my attorney's office. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a few minutes with my back against the door and my hands completely still. Then I called my attorney and told him what had happened. He told me to write everything down with timestamps while it was fresh. I did. He also told me that a power of attorney requires willing consent and that nothing about what my mother had brought to my door had any legal force whatsoever. She had shown up with presentation, not with power. The blazer and the folder and the attorney were theater. I had always had the ability to simply say no. I had just needed to get old enough to know it. My mother called once more, about a week later. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, something about how she hoped I wasn't making decisions out of grief and that her offer stood whenever I was ready. I have not called back. I do not intend to. The estate is being managed by my attorney. The house, which I loved and grew up visiting on every other weekend and in summers, I am keeping. I've started sleeping there on weekends. It feels right in the way that things feel right when they've been earned over a long time. I am not okay, exactly. I'm in the particular territory of grief that doesn't have a clean description, functional during the day, hit by waves at unexpected moments, finding my father in small things everywhere. A type of coffee he liked. A way of folding a shirt. The specific sound of a baseball game playing in another room. But I am clear. I am clear about what happened, about what was done, about what I said, and about what I'm going to do next. I did not do this to punish my mother. I did not do this to win something. I did it because my father spent 15 years building something and left it to me, and the least I owe him is to protect it with the same quiet steadiness he built it with. He would have been calm about it. He always was. I think I finally understand where I got that from. A few things since this got more attention than I expected. My attorney has sent a formal letter to my mother's attorney documenting the visit and my stated position. Nothing legal has come from her side since. Someone asked if I regret calling her when my dad was in the hospital. No. I regret that she is the kind of person who received that call and chose not to come. Those are different things. Someone asked if I think she ever actually loved my father. I think she loved what he represented at a certain time in her life. Whether she was capable of loving the actual man, patient, quiet, steady, genuinely good, I don't know. Maybe she wasn't built for that version of love. Maybe that's why he was so much better off raising me without her. And someone asked, and this is the one that stayed with me, if I'm going to be okay. I lost the person who knew me best in the world. I'm 24 and I'm doing it without him. That is the truest thing I can tell you right now. But I'm his kid. And his kids figure it out. That's what we do. Ethan spent 15 years counting down to the day he could choose his own father. He chose right. And when the man who earned that choice was gone, when the grief was still raw and the chair by the hospital bed was still the last place he'd slept, his mother showed up. Not for him. Not to hold his hand or say she was sorry or acknowledge that she had not been there when it mattered. She showed up with a lawyer and a folder and a blazer she bought for the occasion. And Ethan, 24 years old and 2 weeks out from the worst moment of his life, closed the door on all of it with the clearest words he'd ever spoken. So, jury, did Ethan handle it right? Or should he have found a way to keep his mother in his life despite everything? And the question I really want you to sit with, when a parent spends a lifetime choosing themselves over their child, do they ever get to collect the reward of that child's loyalty? The floor is yours. Drop your verdict in the comments.